Tubers and trolls, welcome back to Telesplash Gaming. I'm Chris. No, I'm Chris. What? Get rid of this nerd. Anyway, Tubers and trolls, welcome back to Telesplash Gaming. I'm Chris. I don't know who that was. It doesn't matter. Today, I want to keep piggybacking on the horror genre. I hope you guys enjoyed the last video I made on the horror games that everybody kind of knew about, their must-plays. But today, I want to talk about some more obscure horror games, kind of the hidden gems, the ones that kind of got left behind, that didn't sell for one reason or another, were kind of shadowed by the Resident Evils and the Silent Hills. So with that being said, stick around and let's take a look at some obscure horror games that I think you guys should take a peek at. If I'm going to make an obscure gaming list, why not start with one called Obscure? So Obscure is a horror game in 2005, released for the PC, the Xbox, as well as the PlayStation 2. Now this revolves around a high school that's kind of had some strange happenings as of late. You know, once a popular student goes missing, his 5 good friends do what any smart teenagers would do. Do they go to the police? Of course not. Do they talk to adults? Of course not. Do they go door to door to find him? No. They stay the night in this high school that's eerie and odd because why not? So what happens is we have basically a video game version of The Faculty, if you guys remember that movie. This game is also unique in that it's co-op for the entire game. So what you do is you take control of these 5 teenage students. Each one has their own unique set of skills to make progression through the game a little bit easier, even though you don't need all 5 of them to beat the game. So as you're playing the game, you can lose a character and you're down to 4. You lose another one, you're down to 3. So you don't need any specific character to live in order to beat the game, but there is different endings and paths and things like that, so it does kind of give you that replayability. So once a character dies, they're gone for good. Now the main thing with this is that it did get pretty good reviews, but the co-op mode is really where the uniqueness comes in, as there's not a ton of survival horror games that have a co-op mode. So Obscure, starting off my list with the co-op survival horror, and if my boys at Gaming Off the Grid are watching this, this might be one to check out, as there is no online play. Next up is Alan Wake for the Xbox 360, and you know what? This game is probably one of the more known games on the list, but it was exclusive through Microsoft, which meant Nintendo fans, PlayStation fans really missed out on a gem in terms of survival horror. Now my friend David, one of my best buddies, he played this game and he never beats a game. He starts more games than anybody I've ever met in my life and then plays them for a while and then gets tired and does something else. But he beat Alan Wake. That's why I know this game is great. And so far I have not taken his advice and played it. I've seen it, but I've not played it. I've read the reviews. And this basically is surrounding a writer, Mr. Stuckey, Alan Wake, who is looking for his wife. I've already said it once, it seems like spouses and girlfriends and significant others are constantly going missing in these games and you have to find them. Okay. So being an author, Alan Wake is trying to find his wife in Bright Falls, Washington while they're on vacation. And it's more of a psychological horror as well as anything, because being an author, he ends up kind of playing out different plot lines within his latest novel that he doesn't even remember writing. So it's all that psychological horror. It's got a great storyline, very suspenseful. It's definitely a thriller. The biggest part about this game also is that since it is episodic based, they're actually making a TV series based on the game, because you play the game in episodes, so episode 1, episode 2, so it feels like you're kind of playing a TV mini-series. But like I said, the reviews for this were fantastic. I've never ran into anybody who really didn't think it was a great game, but it is a little bit obscure because it was released solely for the Xbox 360 and then I believe to PC shortly after that. Moving on, Nintendo is going to get some love. Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Now, this is a game where if you talk to anyone who's played it, they really can't tell you enough good about it. I've never met anybody who hasn't played Eternal Darkness and said, oh my gosh, I love that game. The problem is, it kind of flew under the radar a bit when it was released back in 2002. It was actually originally supposed to come out for the Nintendo 64, but made its way to the GameCube, and kind of playing second fiddle to the Xbox and the PlayStation 2, as well as being released for the GameCube, which is really, you know, a gaming system really geared more towards the younger crowd, even though there is some fantastic games. You know, Nintendo has a lot of PG games, and with that being said, this is the first Nintendo release that got an M rating from the ESRB. So, Eternal Darkness stuck that middle finger out and said, this is the real deal, give us the M rating, because we're not messing around. And they weren't. So, playing as the protagonist, Alexandria, you're in your grandfather's house, and you discover a book called The Tomb of Eternal Darkness. From there, you can control 12 different characters in multiple locations across different time zones. It gets a little confusing explaining it, but when you play it, it makes complete sense. I mean, you're going back hundreds of years and kind of working your way towards modern times. The other thing that makes this game really cool is that you have this thing called the sanity meter. And what happens is as the meter depletes, you enter different sanity effects. These effects can range from looking like you died on screen to adjusting the way the game looks with volume. Your screen goes staticky, you might get a game over screen. One of them scary is they tell you your game's going to be deleted so you lose all your progress. It's really interesting, and there's tons of different sanity effects, and that's really what freaks people out the most. So, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. Kind of a hidden gem in survival horror for anybody that didn't own a Nintendo GameCube. It's interesting, it's a good game, and it's really tense with the sanity effects. Moving on to one of the movie spin-off games that is actually really good, and it's The Thing. Everybody knows about John Carpenter's 1982 classic. If you haven't watched it, you've at least heard of it. What about the game? Did you know there was a game based on the movie-ish? So it's not based purely on the movie, it's based as more of a sequel to the movie. You're playing as a special forces team as they investigate what actually happened on that outpost in the Antarctic. Now, while the game is very third-person action-heavy, it's still definitely tense with a little bit of horror because you are fighting off this unknown monster. Now, what makes the game really interesting and really fun is that there's this system in effect called the trust and the fear system. And what that means is if your teammates trust you, they will back you up in combat, they'll take orders, they'll listen to you. If they're afraid or they're scared, they basically just disappear and you're kind of on your own. They don't listen to what you say, they're always kind of checking over their shoulder, so to speak. So that makes it really interesting. The other thing involved is the infection system. Now with this game, anybody can be infected. So anytime you fight this thing, the monster, it can infect any of your teammates. And the way it works is you don't know they're actually infected until later on down the road. When you're having a shootout, you're fighting, and you think your teammate has your back, and next thing you know, they take a turn and they're trying to kill you. So you've always got to kind of play with a little bit of an eye over your shoulder because you just don't know if they're going to turn on you at any minute. And that's really where the intensity and the thrilling part of this game takes place. I think you guys know me well enough by now. I've always got to throw some retro games in. And I don't mean retro back in 2000. I'm talking like Nintendo. We're going to go with Maniac Mansion. Now, Maniac Mansion, if you played the Nintendo back in the 80s, you probably heard of this game. But I'm guessing that a lot of you have never heard of Maniac Mansion or definitely haven't played it. Being a graphic novel adventure game, it was released back in '87 for a slew of systems, including the NES. It'd be really easy to write this game off with outdated graphics, but you'd really be missing one of gaming's early point-and-click adventures. Even though it doesn't have the scares, the graphics, as some of the more modern games that I'm talking about today or any of my videos, this is definitely a fun one to check out. Take a look back at what it was like when we first got into the survival horror genre and you had the point-and-click adventures. Maniac Mansion is really cool. And it actually created the word cutscenes in video games. This was the first time that someone actually used the term cutscene during the gameplay. And basically what you're doing is you're starting off as a guy named Dave Miller. You end up going to a mad scientist's house because, guess what? He recently kidnapped your girlfriend and you have to find her. Blah, blah, blah. How many times are we going to hear this in gaming? But you know what? I can't help it. I got to keep coming back. I love it. I love rescuing everybody who's in distress. Why not? I'm the hero that this city needs. So anyway, as Dave, you're going around Maniac Mansion. It's a puzzle game. You're trying to solve it and you got to find your girlfriend at the end of the day. If nothing else, check it out. It's kind of fun and you can kind of see one of the old kind of relics of gaming history. the next game up scared me just reading the title. Now, a lot of times I get my information by going to multiple websites. I look at different lists. I go to Reddit forums. I go to a lot of places to try to figure out what everybody's kind of consensus is on like games. Like for this one, I was like, hey, what are some unknown games? Great survival horror games nobody played. Obscure games. And I kind of compiled this list and I narrow it down to a few games that I really want to check out. And this game immediately caught my attention. I have no mouth and I must scream. That's the name of the game. Now, if you're going based solely on graphics, yes, it's not super scary looking. I mean, this game was made in the mid-90s, back in 95. And if you know anything about PC gaming back in the mid-90s, with Myst and then Riven, the point-and-click adventure games were at their height. And this game may very well be one of the scariest of all times, not because of the jump scares or because of the monsters, but because of just the psychological beatdown that you get during this game. This is kind of the background. You are in this apocalyptic, dystopian future where a supercomputer has taken over the world. So we got basically Cyberdyne Systems here making a comeback in the mid-90s. But no, instead of being multiple, it's one computer who absorbed all the other supercomputers, and now it's this all-powerful, world-conquering supercomputer. And human race isn't quite extinct, but we're talking 5 people left. There are 5 humans left on Earth, and they're 109 years old. And the only reason they're around is because this computer wants to torture them psychologically, wants to put them through hell, basically, in different scenarios because it knows their weaknesses, it knows their psychological failures. And so for 109 years, he has kept these people alive and made them go through their past transgressions and torture them psychologically. And that's where the game really gets really, really weird. In the supercomputers got a sick sense of humor and a weird idea of fun. So for instance, in one case, you're a former military officer who has now been turned into a unsightly, childlike ape-looking creature. And that's just the beginning. I mean, you just see that in the very beginning of the game. Each person has a character flaw that gets totally exploited during the gameplay and has to go through all these different adventures based on this sentient computer's idea of fun. The point is to prove that humans are better than machines by making decisions based on some incredibly touchy subjects such as genocide, paranoia, and insanity. So even though the 95 graphics aren't really going to scare you as much, the themes behind the adventures will stay with you for quite a while. And that is why that game is pretty weird. Well, if I got the point-and-click adventures, I might as well just keep that train running. I'm going to beat the dead horse right now. 3 years later, a game called Sanitarium came out.
What's happening?
Now, it's another point-and-click adventure released in '98, and then eventually it was actually ported to Android and iOS in 2015. Now, while doing research, this game popped up on so many lists that I felt like I just had to include it. I mean, I feel professionally obligated to listen to the world and include Sanitarium on my gaming list. So, following a car accident that leaves a man unconscious, he awakens and finds his face heavily bandaged and his memory lost of who he is, where he's from, and what kind of accident he got in to make him appear like he is. To make matters worse, he's also been admitted into a sanitarium where he's got to uncover the mystery behind his accident, his past, and everything else. So you start off basically in this hospital with no idea of what happened to you.
There's some files here.
That's interesting enough as it is. But gameplay follows that typical point-and-click adventure with kind of a Baldur's Gate style viewing angle with a horror theme mapped over the top. And as you play the game, you're kind of transported to different environments, which I believe are in your head as like a sort of twisted fantasy, so you kind of think they might be real, but then you also think you might be paranoid and going crazy, so you kind of come back and forth in between these fantasy lands and reality, which is really interesting. And as you keep coming back to reality, you start piecing more of your backstory together and uncover the truth as to kind of where you're from and why you're there. Now, this game received really positive reviews, and even in 1998 won an award from Computer Gaming World for Best Adventure Game along with Grim Fandango. And it also received many nominations for Best Adventure Game from PC Gamer, IGN, and GameStop. So if you haven't had a chance to check out Sanitarium, this was one that the crowd had spoken and I had to include it on this list. Alright guys, what'd you think of the list? Was there a few games on there that you'd never heard of that piqued your interest a little bit? I know usually I play most of the games that are on my channel, but with this kind of a list, I wanted to find games that I hadn't heard of because that's what makes obscure gaming list fun. What about you? Did you find any games that you want to play? Oh yeah, okay. Definitely found a few games. Well, good. Well, that makes two of us. Let me know what obscure games you guys like that maybe I haven't heard of or the rest of the world doesn't know much about. Keep trolling, keep rolling, hit that subscribe button. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good week.